An 8-year-old girl walked into court and told the judge, "I can read your mind." Everyone laughed, until she revealed the secret he'd killed to hide. Stay until the end, you won't believe what happened next. Subscribe for more stories that will leave you speechless. The courtroom was silent except for the creak of the judge's chair. Every eye turned when the bailiff entered with a small barefoot girl, her hair in messy braids, her jacket too big for her thin frame. Judge Randall frowned. "Who brought this child here?" His voice echoed through the hall. The bailiff shifted nervously. "She asked for you, sir. She wouldn't talk to anyone else." Randall chuckled, shaking his head. "And why is that?" The girl lifted her chin, her large brown eyes unblinking as she spoke. "Because I can read your mind," she said softly. For a moment, there was silence. Then the room erupted in laughter. Lawyers snickered, reporters scribbled eagerly, and even Randall leaned back, smirking. "My mind? Cute trick, little one. But this isn't a circus." The girl didn't move. "You don't believe me," she whispered, her voice steady. "Just like the others, until I tell you what you've been hiding." The laughter faded. Randall's smirk twitched, but he didn't answer. He reached for his gavel. "Enough of this nonsense," but then she stepped closer. "You push it down every night," she said, her words slicing the air. "You hear her screaming. You think no one else can hear it, but I can. I hear everything." Randall's hand froze midair. The room grew cold. The girl tilted her head, her expression calm. "You buried her near the river, didn't you?" Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Randall's knuckles turned white on the gavel. The bailiff looked uneasy. "What did you say?" the judge whispered, his voice trembling for the first time in years. The girl smiled faintly. "Don't worry," she said. "She's still there. And she's not done with you." Randall's jaw tightened, his gavel trembling in his grip. "Bailiff, remove her from this courtroom," he barked, but the command sounded hollow, stripped of its usual authority. Amara didn't move. Her small feet, bare and silent, carried her one step closer to the bench. "You can pretend in front of them," she whispered, her voice soft but cutting through the silence like glass. "But I see what you see. I feel what you feel. She's still there, Judge." Murmurs erupted among the spectators. A lawyer leaned toward another and muttered, "What is this?" But none of them could look away. Randall slammed his gavel down. Crack. The sound echoed, but it didn't silence the girl. "You're lying," he said sharply, though his voice betrayed the faintest tremor. Amara tilted her head and smiled faintly. "If I'm lying," she said, "then why do you keep waking up at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, hearing her call your name?" Randall's face drained of color. He hadn't told anyone about that, not his wife, not his priest, not even himself in the mirror. His hand trembled against the wood of his bench. "This is absurd," he snapped, louder this time, as if volume could crush fear. But Amara didn't stop. She raised a small hand and pointed at him. "You told yourself it was an accident. You told yourself you'd be forgiven. But you never were." Randall's eyes darted around the courtroom, searching for an anchor, but all he found were staring faces. "Stop this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Amara's gaze didn't waver. "She's screaming again," she said calmly. "And she wants everyone to hear her this time." The room froze. Even the bailiff stepped back. Randall's fingers slipped from his gavel. Randall's chest heaved, each breath louder than the whispers spreading through the courtroom. "This is madness," he growled, but his voice cracked halfway, betraying him. Amara's dark eyes never left his. "Do you want me to tell them about the bracelet?" she asked. The room went dead silent. Randall froze. His lips parted, but no words came out. "What bracelet?" a reporter muttered, scribbling furiously. Amara stepped closer to the bench, her small frame seeming to tower over the trembling judge. "The one you kept," she said slowly, deliberately. "The one you hid under the floorboards in your study. The one you pull out when you think no one's watching." Randall's face turned ghostly white. No one could know that. No one. His hand shot to his chest, as though steadying his pounding heart. How do you?" "She showed me," Amara interrupted. Her voice was no longer soft. It carried a haunting certainty that sent a shiver through the room. "Claire." She never stopped screaming. "Not in the ground. Not in your dreams. Not in mine." Gasps filled the room. The name cut through the air like a blade. "Who's Claire?" someone in the gallery demanded. Randall slammed his gavel so hard it cracked against the wood. "Enough," he roared, his face red, sweat dripping down his temple. But it was too late. The little girl's words had poisoned the air, and the silence that followed was heavier than any judgment he had ever delivered. Amara tilted her head again, almost pitying him. "Shall I tell them the rest?" she asked quietly. Randall's hands trembled so violently he nearly dropped the gavel. "Don't," he whispered, but his voice was no longer the voice of a judge. It was the voice of a man cornered by his own ghosts. The crowd leaned forward, every breath in the room sharp and tense. Randall gripped the bench so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You don't know what you're talking about," he rasped, but the words lacked conviction. Amara's gaze never wavered. "You remember that night, don't you?" she said softly, almost like a lullaby, but every word cut deep. "The rain was heavy. She begged you not to drive so fast. You told her you'd take her home. But when she said no, you lost control." Randall's head jerked back as if struck. The color drained from his face until he looked almost hollow. "Stop," he whispered, but Amara's voice only grew louder. "You pushed her," she continued, each syllable sharp and deliberate. "You didn't mean to kill her. You told yourself it was an accident. But then, you buried her." Gasps echoed through the courtroom like a wave crashing against stone. Reporters scribbled furiously. A lawyer in the front row muttered, "This can't be real." Amara's eyes glimmered, and she stepped closer, so close the judge could feel her presence like a cold wind. "You thought the river would hide her," she said. "You thought the current would take her away. But you didn't count on the soil, did you, Judge?" Randall's trembling lips parted, but no sound came. He stared at her like she was a ghost clawing her way out of the earth. "Who told you this?" he demanded weakly. Amara smiled, small and chilling. "She did," she whispered. "She's been waiting for you." The crowd murmured louder now, an electric storm of disbelief and dread. For the first time in his career, Judge Randall looked afraid not of the court, not of the people, but of himself. That Randall's breath came in short, uneven gasps. His eyes darted from face to face, desperate for someone, anyone, to end this nightmare. But no one moved. Amara stood perfectly still, her small hands folded in front of her, her stare unblinking. "Would you like me to prove it?" she asked, her voice calm and terrifyingly certain. The judge's throat tightened. You have nothing," he stammered, but even he didn't sound convinced. Amara tilted her head and pointed to him with one small finger. "In your study," she said. "Under the floorboards by the window, there's a wooden box. Inside it is a bracelet. Silver. Engraved with the letter C. You kept it because you couldn't throw it away, could you?" The air in the room shifted. A reporter dropped his pen. The bailiff looked like he might be sick. "What bracelet?" someone shouted from the gallery. Randall's mouth opened, but no words came out. His skin was pale, slick with sweat. "She's lying," he rasped, but it sounded like begging, not denial. Amara's eyes never left him. "Shall I tell them about the scratches?" she asked. Randall flinched visibly. "She fought you. You still have the scar under your sleeve, don't you?" Gasps filled the room. The murmurs turned into frantic whispers. Randall clutched his robe tighter around his arm, as though hiding it would erase her words. But his silence said more than any confession could. Amara stepped closer to the bench. "You thought you buried her," she said, her voice steady, almost gentle. "But she didn't stay buried. She's been screaming ever since, and you know it." Randall's gavel slipped from his trembling hand and clattered against the floor. For the first time in his life, the judge had no control. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, their cameras flashing like lightning. Lawyers stood from their benches, murmuring frantically to one another. The bailiff hesitated, glancing nervously between Amara and the trembling judge. But through the noise, Randall's voice cut weakly, "Enough. This is all nonsense." His words carried no weight. Amara didn't flinch. Her gaze was sharp, unwavering. "Tell them, Judge," she said softly, but the quietness in her tone carried more power than any scream. "Tell them why you hear her every night." The crowd stilled, the whispers fading into tense silence. Randall's hands trembled against the bench. He opened his mouth but nothing came out, only a broken breath. "You can deny me," Amara continued, "but you can't deny her." Then she turned slowly, facing the entire courtroom. Her name was Claire, she announced. She was 24. She trusted him. Gasps tore through the crowd. A man in the back row shouted, "Who's Claire?" But Amara didn't answer him, her eyes were fixed on Randall. "You told yourself it was an accident," she said, her words slicing through the heavy air. "But accidents don't leave scars, do they, Judge?" Randall's face twisted, his jaw trembling. His fingers clawed at the edge of the bench as if holding onto it could save him. Reporters surged forward, the sound of frantic typing filling the room. "Judge Randall," one called out, "is this true?" The judge's lips quivered, his skin pale as wax. I, but he couldn't say it. Amara stepped closer, her small shadow falling over him. "She's standing right behind you," she whispered. Randall froze, his eyes darting to the empty space behind him. His breath hitched. For a moment, it looked as though he actually saw her. Randall's knees wobbled as he gripped the bench for support, his gaze locked on the empty space behind him. The courtroom held its breath, no one daring to move. Amara's voice broke the silence, soft but cutting like a blade. "You see her, don't you?" she asked. Randall's lips trembled. "No," he whispered, but it was a denial only in sound, not in truth. His eyes were wide, haunted, staring past Amara into the void only he could see. The little girl took one slow step closer, her bare feet silent against the floor. "She's been waiting," she said. "Every night, she calls your name, but you try to drown her out. You drink. You work. You hide. But she's still there." The crowd stirred, a few people murmuring in disbelief, others frozen in grim fascination. Randall's hands shook so badly that the gavel rolled from the bench and struck the floor with a hollow crack. He didn't even notice. "You're lying," he rasped, though his voice was hollow, almost pleading. Amara tilted her head, studying him like one might study a trapped animal. "If I'm lying," she said softly, "why is she standing closer now?" Randall's breath came in short, ragged gasps. A tear slid down the side of his face, unnoticed by him, but not by the dozens of eyes watching his every move. "Stop," he croaked, but it was no longer a command. It was a plea. Amara's gaze hardened. "She says she won't stop screaming until you tell them the truth." The judge shuddered, his grip on composure slipping like sand through his fingers. For the first time, the powerful Judge Randall looked like a man cornered by the ghost of his own sins. The silence broke like shattered glass. Reporters shouted questions, their voices clashing in a storm of noise. "Judge Randall, is this true? What is she talking about? Who's Claire?" The bailiff stepped forward, uncertain, but froze when Randall raised a trembling hand. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. "She's lying," he whispered, but it was too soft, too broken for anyone to believe. Amara didn't move. Her stare was unrelenting, her voice calm and sharp enough to cut through the chaos. "You kept her bracelet," she said, louder this time. "The silver one. You hid it under the floorboards in your study." A wave of gasps rippled through the room. "What bracelet?" a lawyer demanded, but Randall didn't answer. His hands clutched the bench, his knuckles bone white. Amara's voice was merciless. "You see it every time you close your eyes, don't you? You can feel the weight of it. You kept it because part of you wanted to be punished." Randall's head jerked toward her, his eyes wide and frantic. "Stop," he hissed, but Amara only tilted her head and whispered, "She's standing closer now." Randall flinched as though he'd been struck, his gaze snapping back to that same empty space behind him. The room fell eerily quiet, the crowd watching him with growing horror. He was unraveling. "Judge," a reporter shouted, "what is she talking about?" Randall's breathing grew ragged, his chest heaving. He looked around wildly, like a man searching for an escape, but there was none. Amara's small hand rose slowly, pointing straight at him. "She says you can't hide anymore," she said softly. "She's tired of waiting." The judge's legs buckled slightly, and for the first time, fear replaced authority in his eyes. That Randall's hands trembled so violently that he gripped the bench as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. His eyes darted across the courtroom, desperate for an ally, but every face stared back with the same expression, fear and suspicion. Amara stepped closer, her small shadow stretching toward him like a noose tightening around his neck. "She's not going to stop," the girl whispered. "You hear her, don't you?" Randall's lips quivered. "No," he rasped, his voice cracking, but the denial rang hollow. "She's behind you," Amara said, her voice sharper now. "Right now. She's watching you the way she did the night you pushed her." A strangled sound escaped Randall's throat. He slammed his fist against the bench, the crack of wood echoing through the room. "Enough!" he roared, his voice breaking under its own weight. The outburst silenced the courtroom, but not Amara. She didn't flinch. "You hear her," she repeated, stepping forward again, her tone as steady as stone. "Tell them what she says." Randall's chest heaved, sweat dripping down his face. "This is madness," he bellowed, but his eyes betrayed him, they flicked, just for an instant, to that same empty space behind him. The crowd saw it. They saw everything. "What does she say, Judge?" Amara pressed, her voice quiet but merciless. Randall's jaw trembled. She, he stuttered, the words strangled in his throat. The room leaned closer. Even the bailiff stood frozen, waiting for an answer. Amara's lips curved into the faintest, coldest smile. "She says you can't hide anymore," she whispered. Randall's face crumpled, and a sound escaped him, a raw, broken sound that didn't belong to a man who was innocent. For the first time, Judge Randall looked guilty. And everyone knew it. Randall's fingers dug into the wooden bench so hard it seemed they might snap. His chest heaved with short, frantic breaths. The entire courtroom was silent now, waiting, watching. Amara didn't move. Her gaze held him in place like chains. "Say it," she whispered. Randall's lips parted, but no words came out, only a trembling exhale. His eyes darted to the bailiff, then to the crowd, then back to Amara, who stood so still it was as if the room belonged to her. "You didn't mean to do it," Amara said softly, her voice slicing the air. "You didn't mean to push her. You didn't think the fall would kill her." Randall's face twisted with pain, his hands shaking violently. "Stop," he croaked, his voice breaking, but his protest lacked power. "You panicked," Amara continued, her words relentless. "You buried her near the river, thinking no one would ever find out." Gasps tore through the courtroom. "Is this true?" a reporter shouted, but Randall didn't respond. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came. His eyes glistened. Amara's head tilted, her braids brushing her shoulders. "You hear her every night," she whispered, her tone almost gentle now. "She's screaming, isn't she?" Randall's knees buckled slightly, and for a moment, it seemed he might collapse. His voice cracked, barely audible. I didn't mean to." The words hung in the air like a confession dragged from the depths of his soul. Amara's expression didn't change. "Then tell them," she pressed. The judge's gaze swept across the crowd, and for the first time, he looked smaller, defeated. It was an accident," he whispered. The courtroom gasped in unison, the sound sharp as thunder. Randall's voice cracked like splintering glass as his words hung in the tense courtroom air. It was an accident," he whispered again, but this time louder, almost pleading. Reporters leaned forward, cameras flashing like lightning. The bailiff stared at him in shock, frozen in place. Amara's eyes never left his. "No," she said softly but firmly, "it wasn't just an accident. Tell them everything." Randall's breathing grew ragged, his face flushed and slick with sweat. His hands trembled violently on the bench, his knuckles white. She wouldn't stop screaming," he muttered, as though speaking only to himself. "I told her I was sorry. I didn't mean." His words dissolved into a broken sob. A ripple of horrified whispers swept through the crowd. "Who?" a lawyer demanded, his voice cutting through the room. Amara didn't answer, she didn't have to. Randall's eyes were vacant, staring at something only he could see. "Claire," he choked out, the name spilling from his lips like poison he'd been holding for years. "Her name was Claire. I didn't mean to. His legs buckled, and he collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. A young man in the back suddenly stood, his voice trembling with fury. "Claire was my sister." All eyes turned to him. Randall froze, his hands lowering slowly, revealing a face twisted with guilt and terror. Amara took a single step closer, her voice calm but final. "She says you can't hide anymore. She wants you to finish it." Randall's head dropped. His shoulders sagged as though the weight of his sins had finally crushed him. "I killed her," he whispered, and the room erupted in chaos. The courtroom exploded with noise, reporters shouting questions, lawyers arguing, and gasps from the stunned crowd. But in the middle of the chaos, Judge Randall sat motionless, his head bowed, his confession hanging heavy in the air. The bailiff hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. "Judge Randall," he said, his voice firm but trembling with disbelief, "you're under arrest for the murder of Claire Donovan." The judge didn't resist. His hands, once symbols of power and control, now hung limp as the officers approached and cuffed him. "I didn't mean to," Randall whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking. "It was supposed to be a secret. No one was supposed to know." Amara stood silently, her small frame unshaken by the storm she had unleashed. Her deep brown eyes followed him as the officers pulled him from the bench. "She always knew," the girl murmured, her voice barely above a whisper but sharp enough to cut through the noise. Randall froze for just a second, glancing back at her with hollow, haunted eyes. Then he was dragged away. A young man in the audience, Claire's brother, was sobbing openly, fists clenched with rage and grief. Reporters swarmed forward, shouting, "How did she know? Who is this girl?" Amora simply turned and walked toward the courthouse doors, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. A reporter dared to ask, "How did you do it? How could you know his secret?" Amora paused, her head tilting just enough for her braids to shift over her shoulders. "I don't just hear thoughts," she said softly, her voice calm and haunting. "I hear the voices of the ones you've tried to silence." And with that, she stepped out of the courtroom, leaving nothing but stunned silence behind her.